I'm sure you all remember the day, Friday the 13th, I may point out, when you last left school, unaware of the extenuating 1.5 years of quarantine you were about to face. The world was initially oblivious to the threat of a pandemic. News of the coronavirus had been out since WHO announced the presence of the virus in Wuhan, China on January 9th of 2020, already threatening to shatter the world's expectations for the year. But most of us shrugged it off. Though cautionary measures were already being taken in the United States in early March, with the first cases rising up across the country, the last day of school before we went off to our never-ending lockdown felt as normal as any other day. As I walked away from the memory-filled trailers that day, I remember not even bothering to look back, only giving my teachers and classmates a final goodbye, expecting to see them again in a week or so. Until the world shut down, we were stuck at home, scattered, without a proper schedule and uniformity that was provided by physical school. Internet connections were past capacity, laptops and computers were out of reach or out of stock. The world was a disaster, and so had become school. My name is Annika Suman, a rising junior at the Early College at Guilford, and here at NCSSM's online program.
Hi, my name is Caroline Dash. I'm a rising junior at North Davidson High School and part of NCSSM's online program.
My name is Claire Meehan. I'm a rising junior at Southern Elements High School, and I am also part of the NCSSM online program.
And today we're going to be talking about the COVID-19 learning slide among high school students.
So our research question is has different socioeconomic factors among North Carolina school districts impacted high school student performance, known as the COVID-19 learning slide, during the COVID pandemic in 2020 and 2021. So during a typical school year, we learn quite a bit, in my opinion. So ever since the 2020 COVID pandemic hit, the United States education system had to go fully remote with no students learning in person. This rapid and unexpected change in learning was handled as best as it could be with the limited time and resources available to everyone, which wasn't enough to keep educating kids as normal. Kids didn't show up to class because they couldn't due to lack of resources or family obligations, or they just didn't care because it was, a pass or fail system, and why show up and learn the rest of the Pythagorean theorem if you're going to pass anyway. So because kids didn't finish their learning, we have to play a little game of catch up now.
So here's a closer look at incomes. As you can see by the chart of average annual wage and median household income in North Carolina, there's obviously quite a variability between different NC counties and their economic status. So the different counties of North Carolina have different income levels for their residents. While differences have a great effect on quality of education, but these differences have been exacerbated by the shift to online learning. Said differences often increase loss of learning in lower income students. So as we can imagine, with lower income families, they may not have as proper access to technology or better access to a consistent internet connection and so on, that may disturb their academic learning and their performance.
This is a scatter plot of the difference in SAT scores between the 2018-2019 school year and the 2019-2020 school year for a random sample of 30 North Carolina counties. It is important to note that about half, or maybe more than half due to the SAT cancellations related to the pandemic, of the SAT scores for the 2019-2020 school year were taken before the pandemic. But this stresses the differences, as most likely the scores for a whole online year would have greater differences. As you can see on the graph, while there is not a linear trend between county income and difference in SAT scores, it is notable that the counties which had the biggest drop in scores are counties with lower than average incomes. Overall dropout rate has decreased from online school due to lack of disciplinary dropouts. These scatter plots show the difference in dropout rates and dropout rates in 2020 in the same random sample of 30 North Carolina counties. As you can see, the counties with the biggest change in dropout rates were lower income counties, but the counties with the highest dropout rates in 2020 were still mostly lower income counties.
So some advantages to succeeding in online school is having a good computer, reliable and fast internet access, along with a quiet place to work and minimal distractions and stressors in those quiet places. Families that rely on older siblings to keep the house running while the parents are at work, or older siblings who have to go to work, do not have minimal stress. They do not have minimal distractions, and they definitely don't have a quiet place to work with younger siblings running around. And lower income families may not have reliable and fast access to the internet or a good computer. Another factor is that some schools did not have a one-to-one device to student ratio at the start of the pandemic. So good computers were not available to those who needed them.
I interviewed Dr. Williams, president of Strategic Educational Alliances Incorporated and former president of the Public School Forum, and he feels as though the online learning due to COVID-19 could have varying effects on different groups of students. For instance, students who require smaller group classroom enrichment to stay active and engaged could have additional troubles as the online learning environment would not provide enough engaging activities for these students. This lack of engaging students also disproportionately affects low-income students. Students in high-income families could have engaging academic programs, private teachers, or their parents' time to work on engaging activities with them. Many lower-income students do not have these options and rely on school to provide enriching activities, which online school has not been able to do for many students. Low-income students are particularly vulnerable to having increased rates of learning loss. As shown by the Core Data Collaborative for California students, though it's likely the results for North Carolina would be similar, they showed that low-income students in particular are, to quote, falling behind more compared to others and lost substantially more learning, while certain high-income students' learning actually accelerated. McKinsey and Company made statistical models based on academic studies and concluded learning loss is likely greatest among low-income students, referencing data from Curriculum Associates showing, to quote, only 60% of low-income students are regularly logging into online instruction. 90% of high-income students do.
Low income and internet access. According to NC Public School Forum, broadband internet access ranks #1 in education issues of 2021, with low income students being particularly susceptible to issues from lack of broadband access. Besides infrastructure, according to the NC Forum, this lack of broadband access is due to additional barriers that include affordability. There are some programs working to expand broadband internet currently, but it's definitely still a struggle.
So this is a graphic that we made, and it's an overview of school system funding and its effect on the district's learning slide. As you can see, the SAT score change between 2019 and 2020 for a specific county, and the school's expenditures, which we extracted from the 2017-2018 year, just to ballpark their typical spending. The SAT score change seems to be smaller for the systems that seem to spend more money on their schools. So for example, the Charlotte-Mecklenburg schools basically stayed stagnant with or without COVID, and they spent almost $2 billion on their school system. So the annual expenditures and SAT scores have quite a correlation. The typical amount of money a school system spends seem to have some relationship with the academic performance of its high school students. To reason out this correlation, it may be possible that the circumstances of the COVID-19 hit may have been hard on some school system budgets, and they may have been unable to provide their students with proper technology or equipment to accommodate with the situation of quarantine and lockdown in the spring of 2021. If a school system already had a large typical expenditure for their public schools, they may have been able to better accommodate for their students even during virtual learning, and may have had a better access to resources to assist students and their families in adjusting to a new regular of online learning, minimizing the effect on their academic success and what is called the COVID-19 learning slide.
I interviewed Dr. Michael Mayer, Executive Director of Learning Recovery for the NC Department of Public Instruction. He discussed how learning declines had varying prominence between subjects and student groups. On average, kids that spent more time in remote instruction fared worse, as well as at-risk students or students with historically less access to resources showed greater learning slides. Some of these groups include students of color, low-income students, students suffering from homelessness, and more. In addition, Dr. Mayer also shared his opinion on the greatest issues regarding learning loss inequities, expected outcomes, and plans going forward. Some of the factors impacting the learning loss sustained by kids are access to broadband, due to the fact that North Carolina is more than 80% rural, and the last mile plan, which is getting broadband from the road to the houses, has had some issues, It means that while North Carolina does have internet, the getting it to the houses is where it falls short and causes many North Carolinians to not have broadband internet. In addition, poverty is a major cause of inequalities in learning, and the pandemic has only exacerbated these issues, and the effects can be seen by the disproportionately large learning slide in low-income students. Also, student mental health, which experts are expecting to see an uptick in mental health issues in students, is a large factor, which also ties into poverty, as things like a parent losing a job or a parent having to be on the front lines due to the high amount of low-income jobs that require being on the front lines can cause major mental health issues in students. Also, experts expect to see roughly a 5 to 10% decrease in graduation rates, which is expected to be greater for ninth graders, as a major shift from 8th to ninth being online could cause them to be even more behind than other grades. Going forward, people like Dr. Mayer hope to decrease the impact of the pandemic on academic success of students. They plan on taking years and implementing programs to help the students recover. These programs include high-dosage tutoring, summer programming, and things called acceleration academies, to be a summer program to go through the contents of the classes of next year's grades so students can get a head start into the material. Dr. Mayer also shared with us some data regarding the EOCs of Math 1 and Math 3 in correlation with demographics. And as you can see, certain at-risk groups like low-income students and ethnically minority students declined in Math 1 and Math 3 for varying amounts, showing their COVID-19 learning loss. And this also ties into the fact that these minorities are often lower income and disproportionately lower income, and so that could have ties as to why there seems to be divisions among race.
So social and emotional learning, in addition to academic learning loss, there has also been significant detriments to social and emotional learning in students. In a paper by Dr. Rosenblau of the Hunt Institute, she discusses how more fortunate students have family and social supports to navigate difficult struggles in life, but some students, like those who suffer the plight of poverty, heavily rely on the support of the school in facing individual challenges growing socially and emotionally.
Dr. Rosenbaum also discusses how while the pandemic is taking away supporting connections, it also has introduced new stressors that disproportionately affect low-income students. As in addition to other stressors, students in economically disadvantaged counties also worry about food insecurity, housing insecurity, and stress from adults surrounding the economic downturns of the pandemic, during which support systems are failing to meet their social and economical needs and emotional needs. So in conclusion, according to Rebecca Tippett, the director of Carolina Demography at the Carolina Population Center at UNC Chapel Hill, in the second month of the 2020-21 school year, nearly 63,000 fewer students were in the state's public schools, which is a 4.4% decline from the year before. And the school system's available funds, the household incomes of students in certain NC counties, and internet connections, as we have shown you in our research, often worsen the conditions of online learning for low-income students. Furthermore, a major effect of COVID-19 was the socio-emotional toll that virtual learning took on students, regardless of economic status and background. But with the rising number of vaccinated individuals, we hope that these problems will end by the first semester of next year as we return to our new normal.
And then here are credits.
We used a slide template for our PowerPoint, so these are the credits for those.
Yeah.
And thank you.
Thank you for your time.